Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. This month on this channel, we've been talking about intimacy. So, how to develop and maintain healthy, intimate connections with anyone from friends to partners to parents to siblings, anyone we just want to experience more authentic connection with. And today, what I want to talk about is the difference between how securely attached people form and maintain intimate connections versus insecurely attached people. And there is a key ingredient to this process that is very important that we often haven't learned if we are insecurely attached. And what that ingredient is attunement. So, attunement is essentially the process of being engaged in this kind of energetic dance with another person. So, being really present with each other in a way that allows each person to learn the other's intricacies and kind of play with their energy in a very natural way. So, this is about essentially being in an interpersonal flow with someone. When we are securely attached, when we have a parent who is deeply attuned to us from a young age, we learn what it feels like to have that type of attention and empathy focused on us. So we learn naturally and instinctively to approach making connections the same way as we grow up. However, when we are insecurely attached, often the way we learn to relate to other people did not involve a lot of attunement. So, this is a skill that we need to learn as we go through our lives in order to get to a place where our intimate connections are functioning as healthily as they possibly can. So, what we're going to go over today is what happens in the case of two different people growing up, one of whom has an attuned caregiver and one who does not. So, one who has either a misattuned caregiver or an intermittently attuned caregiver. So, a parent who is able to be present and to read you quite accurately, but that presence was inconsistent, and which blind spots might develop for the person who didn't have that attunement, as well as which compensatory strategies you may have developed if you grew up insecurely attached that you now think are the key to developing intimacy, but that actually are kind of serving to keep other people at arm's length unintentionally in your life. Then we're going to talk about what it takes to learn the skill of attunement, so how we can get better at practicing this in order to start building some really fundamental intimacy skills. So, to start us off, I want to talk about what attunement looks like in infancy. When you have a parent who is really attuned to their child, what you have is a parent who is generally able to reflect the child back to themselves reasonably well. So the child gets a little distressed, and the parent is able to communicate using body language, because children at that age do not have language skills yet, that they understand their distress, that they see it, and also that they're able to contain it in some way. So they're able to soothe the child in a way that makes the child feel as though there is someone competent who understands them and is available to help them. And so this is the process of a parent being very present with a child. I don't know if you've ever gone and been around a parent who has like a 6-month-old baby. And the baby can have these very specific noises or coos or little movements they do, and the parent is able to interpret them incredibly accurately. So they might know what their child sounds like when their distress is due to having a wet diaper versus being hungry versus being tired. And they're able to tune into these little nuances that give them information about that child's inner world. So this is often what we get in a secure caregiving dynamic. We get a parent who is sensitized to their child's specific needs. And the child learns in that process that if I show my emotions in a congruent way, so if I simply display what is happening for me, those emotions are going to get reflected back to me, and someone is going to be present with me, and that presence is going to lead to a deep form of connection. And then as that child grows up, without ever putting it into conscious words, what they're going to do is mimic that strategy when they're meeting and trying to form connections with other people. So they're going to do exactly what their caregiver did with them, and they're going to be present with people when they're meeting them. They're going to ask questions about people. They're going to be curious about them. And they're really going to be centered in the moment with what is happening. And for the most part, secure children are going to treat everybody they meet like a blank slate. So they're not going to be trying to fit people into all of these different boxes and kind of crack the code on who they are as soon as they get in touch with them. They're just going to sit with people and notice what emerges inside of the dynamic and what's unique to every friendship or every relationship they enter into. Because again, this was what they experienced growing up. They experienced a caregiver who was curious about them, interested in their nuances, and not projecting any particular way of being onto them. So secure children who had attuned caregivers learn to approach connection through the lens of presence and curiosity. And this is in somewhat stark contrast to those who were raised insecurely attached. When you are raised by a non-attuned caregiver, and this does not mean a caregiver who is malicious or who doesn't want to give you love and support. It could look like a caregiver who is working 2 jobs and doesn't have enough time to stay consistently attuned to their child. It might look like a caregiver who has their own mental health challenges or attachment issues and who is doing their best to pass on a secure form of love to their child, but is unaware of where they have their own blind spots. But whatever the case may be, if you had a caregiver who is only sometimes able to reflect you back to yourself properly, or who fairly consistently missed the mark on what your feelings and needs are in some major way, or maybe a caregiver who really struggled to be present themselves, so even when they were with you, they weren't really fully with you. Their mind was always kind of somewhere else. In all of these cases, it's likely that you're not going to really learn what it feels like to be attuned to another person. So to do that present moment give and take, where you're just exchanging information on a somatic level about what it's like to be each other in that moment. And so you're going to have to develop a different strategy for maintaining connection. Because all of us need to stay in connection with our caregivers. It is a survival response to be able to do that, to be able to get and keep their attention to make sure that our needs will get met. So if the option of presence and curiosity is not available to you from a young age because your parent is not present with or curious about you in a consistent way, you learn that to connect with that parent, you have to develop some sort of strategy. And this is not a conscious strategy. So this is not something your mind is working on in words when you are an infant. The strategy that we develop arises first inside of our bodies. So let's say you learn as an infant that if you express an extreme level of distress, you get met with a kind of disgust response from your caregiver, or they suddenly seem dissociated and distant. Your body is going to naturally start repressing extreme distress when it comes up because you need to not show it in order to stay in connection with your caregiver. So you now have a somatic strategy online. It is not one you consciously chose, it is one your body chose for you. Or let's say your parent only responds to you if you are in extreme distress. Now your somatic strategy is going to be for your body to start amplifying any feelings that you have of pain or discomfort in order to ensure that you probably get your caregiver's attention. So your body develops these somatic strategies for keeping you in connection. The belief that secure people have that if I simply show my emotions exactly as they are, at the exact volume that they're happening, I will receive appropriate care and support, is not the same story that your body has internalized as true. And as you grow up, you're going to naturally default to using strategy and analysis as your main connecting tools, because you're going to have that belief deep in your bones that connection does not happen through being present and curious and allowing everyone to just relax and be who they are. You believe on a core somatic level, I have to in some way change my experience of who I am in order to form connection with other people. And the best way to do that as we get older and our brains start developing is often to start analyzing other people very consciously and trying to figure out before we're even present in connection with them. How is this other person operating? What kind of a person do I think of them as? What type of person might they like? Ergo, what type of a person should I present myself as in order to get in connection with this other person? And the approach will be different depending on if you err anxious or err avoidant. If you err avoidant, that script might look like, how do I become completely self-sufficient so that people perceive me as someone who is competent and ergo worthwhile? If you err more anxious, it might be about determining what other people like and then trying to mold or shape your personality to fit that in some way to get that approval. But in any case, you're going to already have a very different strategy for forming connections than those who are raised securely attached. So when we are analyzing people, it often might feel like we're being curious about them because we might be really focused on them when what we're actually doing is trying to fit them into all these different types of boxes in our brain. So growing up as someone who had fearful avoidant patterning, I got extremely into personality theory for a number of years. I have a whole past career that is based solely around analyzing different models of personality so that I could fit everybody I met into the absolute most perfect box in my brain. If I could just kind of understand where they fit on all of these axes and then put together a perfect image of who I believed that person was, to me, that felt like attunement because I was really attuned to the image of this person that I had inside of my brain. However, when I was actually present with people in the moment, I was only ever really half there. And the other half of me was busy measuring everything they were saying up against all of these mental models I had in my brain that were trying to calculate exactly what type of a person this was, exactly what their motivations and drives might be, and how they were most likely going to show up in the future based on all of those boxes that I was putting them into. And for you, it might not be personality theory. It might be that you are constantly trying to assess whether someone is a good person or a bad person, or a competent person or an incompetent person, or whatever other models of understanding people you have learned to cling to as a safety net. But the important thing to note here is that whenever we are doing that, what we are not doing is being in the present moment, taking someone in exactly as they are. Every single person on the planet has a completely unique experience. Nobody is going to fit cleanly into the categories of one specific attachment style, personality type, level of development, whatever it is. If we want to actually get to know people, we need to be willing to put all of that down and simply attune to the real person in front of us in the present moment. Now, of course, this is harder than it sounds. I did make an entire video on this that I will link in the description of this video that's just around staying present with people and building intimacy out of the present moment. But before we talk more about how to do that, we're going to go into what happens after this phase. So when we are secure versus insecure, and we manage to form connections with someone, what strategies are now going to be online for each of those people as they aim to deepen their connections inside of relationships? I do want to note the irony here of making a video that is all about not putting people into boxes and using two very clear archetypes of secure and insecure to put people into boxes, but for educational purposes, there's not really another way of going about this. Just couldn't go on without acknowledging the irony. So, when we have those skills online for being present with people and curious about them, what we naturally develop as we grow up is a good sense of differentiation. Differentiation is just a fancy psychological word that means the ability to have a healthy balance between intimacy and autonomy. So a well-differentiated person is someone who's pretty clear on who they are, as well as how other people are different from them, and so they're able to mentalize well for other people. Mentalization, another unnecessarily fancy psychology word, simply means the ability to have a pretty good idea of what other people are thinking. So when we're imagining what it's like to be somebody else, if we're mentalizing for them well, it means we're probably not experiencing a whole bunch of biases that are in the way of understanding another person clearly. When we are well differentiated and able to mentalize well for the people in our lives, generally it means that we're really good at being adaptive in our approach to relationships. Because if I have a clear idea of who I am, where my boundaries lie, what I need out of a relationship, and what I have to offer, and I'm able to be pretty clear on who other people are and what their wants and needs are and what they have to offer and what they want to receive, it's not that hard to find a lot of healthy compromises inside of our relationships to other people. Because we have a pretty uncomplicated view of what all the moving pieces are and what we are and are not willing to do to make a given relationship work. We're not expecting every relationship we have to look the same or to follow the same rules. We're able to kind of tune into our bodies and go, okay, here's what I like and don't like inside of this relationship. Here's what feels good versus here's what feels bad. And we can make decisions about each relationship accordingly. Now, to contrast this, let's go back to that other person who grew up without that attuned caregiver. When we receive an inadequate amount of feedback on our inner worlds, so when we receive either incorrect feedback, our parent is not able to properly understand what we're thinking or feeling and reflect it back to us, or they're uninterested or incapable of doing so in a consistent way, what happens is that we're kind of left alone to make sense of our own inner world. And so we might get pretty good as we grow up at consciously understanding why we're doing everything we're doing. But we might be missing information about how other people are operating differently. And so when we're trying to interpret people's behavior, we're often going to be unconsciously projecting onto them what we would be thinking or what we would be feeling if we said or did what they said or did, instead of being able to differentiate clearly and understand that we are very separate from them. Now, if you are avoidant, this might not sound too familiar to you. You might be thinking, well, I'm extremely aware that everybody's separate from me and that they're saying and doing things for their own reasons. And where your blind spot might be in this process is actually that you are, in fact, influencing your relationship with someone. And if they are upset or if there is something they are struggling with inside of the relationship, it might not be just a them issue. It might be something that you need to work out interpersonally. Being good at differentiation means knowing where you end and someone else begins, but it also means being able to understand how the two of you influence each other, which tends to be where the avoidant has that blind spot. If you are not aware of how people are impacting you, you're also going to assume that other people are always functioning inside of a kind of psychological silo, when in fact, our relational world is impacting all of us all of the time. It's just about being able to cleanly understand what's me, what's someone else, and what is the dynamic interplay between the two of us. Now, because you don't necessarily have that ability to differentiate clearly when you grow up insecurely attached, what's likely to happen in instances of conflict is you're going to become rigid in your approach. And this is super important to note. That rigidity is actually highly adaptive for you before you learn something else. So if you're not getting enough feedback from your caregiver when you're young about what you need to do in order to stay in close connection with them, if you find anything that works about 70% of the time, it is absolutely going to be in your best interests to apply that method 100% of the time, because it means that at least 70% of the time, you're going to be able to stay in connection. And the same is true of how we approach intimacy and relationships as we grow up, if we have that insecure patterning. You might learn that certain things you do, certain parts of that strategy you adapted from a young age, work enough of the time. But the other 30% of the time might be causing really big problems for you. The problem is that if we are not super present inside of our relationships, and if we are only navigating and approaching relationships based on our best guesses and the best analyses that are available to us, it means we're not collecting a lot of raw data about what is unique to that relationship. What might work inside of this relationship that didn't work in my last one, or vice versa? What might not work inside of this relationship, even though it did work really well in my last one? And so we can get really rigid and hyper-fixated when we're insecurely attached on the way that we think a relationship should go, or the way that we think a relationship should look, instead of actually getting present with ourselves and our partner and the relationship as it is and attending to that. So instead of slowing down and unpacking and really hearing each other out on one another's perspectives, especially around where a certain problem is happening, we're likely, if we are insecurely attached, to go very quickly to what we think the other person should do or how we think things should go and cling to dear life to that thing that has saved us 70% of the time. So, what we're going to move our focus to now is how to start shifting these relational strategies. So, if we grew up learning that the way to form connections was through strategy and analysis, how do we start shifting into a place where we're connecting based on presence and curiosity instead? And then, if we learned projection and rigidity as strategies for maintaining relationships with people, how do we start moving that into a space where we're instead tuning into differentiation, so understanding the unique needs of the relationship, and adaptation, so being flexible in our approach and allowing ourselves to give each relationship whatever that unique relationship needs. And of course, if the unique relationship needs are something we don't like, then we also have the flexibility and freedom to walk away from it. So the kind of key players in the game of moving from strategy and analysis to presence and connection are: 1, checking ourselves for congruence and working on our ability to stay authentic inside of our connections. And this is going to work best inside of our connections with other securely attached people. So checking ourselves for how we're communicating. When someone asks me how I am I answering with the true answer in a contained way? Or am I just defaulting to things like I'm fine? When I'm upset with someone, am I communicating that to them directly and letting them know what my underlying need is? Or am I getting passive aggressive and telling them, of course I'm not mad, when it's very clearly to them and anybody else watching my body language that my body is telling a different story? The more we can work on developing emotional congruence, so showing up and being honest about what's actually going on for us, the more we're allowing other people the opportunity to attune to us and to get into that state of interpersonal flow with us. Because if we are obscuring our true feelings and thoughts and motivations from people, but we're trying to form an intimate connection with them, it's kind of like trying to dance a duet where your partner has absolutely no idea what dance moves you're planning to bust out when. They're not going to be able to sync up with you because you are not being transparent about the way in which you're trying to move alongside them. So this needs to become a practice when we're forming connections with other people. Can we catch ourselves in the moments where we're inclined to be dishonest or inclined to gloss over the truth because our bodies are screaming at us that that's the only reasonable thing to do? Can we challenge ourselves to be 10% more honest and congruent in our interactions, and then 20%, and then 30%, until eventually we're showing up more authentically most of the time? This is going to go a really long way in other people being able to attune to you. And when other people can attune to you, now you're going to start getting that type of feedback from people that you didn't get when you were young. You're going to be able to start seeing yourself reflected back to yourself more clearly through the secure connections that you form. And so you're going to start developing a kind of taste for what having that form of empathy and connectedness looks and feels like when it's directed at you. And then you start developing the opportunity to do the same in response, and to learn nothing terrible is going to happen if I go into an instance of speaking with someone without all of these scripts operating in the back of my mind. I can just show up, be present with someone, be mindful of the fact that I am going to have those scripts going through my mind, but choose not to consciously focus on them when I'm with someone. So just notice when I have something coming up in the back of my mind that's either trying to fit this person into a category, or tell myself a story about who they are as a person, or getting distracted by scripts that are saying things like, oh my God, what does that movement that they just made with their face mean? Do they hate me? Are they judging me? Are they going to go home and gossip to everybody about me? Slowing down our process and learning to just be with people in the moment, Stay mindful of what's coming up, but don't get attached to it. And just notice that in every interaction you have that is a little bit awkward or a little bit uncomfortable because you aren't covering things up with fake niceties or half dissociating into your own mind, you still survive those interactions. This is a skill that gets built slowly, the skill of learning to be present with other people. And you're going to find that the more you're able to practice this skill, the more wide-ranging your curiosity about them is going to become. Because you're not instantly putting them into all these different categories in your mind and deciding that there's nothing more you need to know about them because you've decided you've got them figured out. And now you're relating mostly to this image you have of them inside of your mind rather than the person in front of you. The more we get in tune with the people in front of us and we listen to them and we ask them open-ended questions, the more we start to develop a nuanced and complex idea of who that person is that is actually completely accurate to them because it's based on feedback they have given us. Now, of course, people are not always going to give us perfectly honest and direct feedback about themselves, but this is still going to get us a lot closer to the mark of who somebody is than trying to fit them into all of these categories in our brain is, at least when it comes to developing deep intimacy with someone. That's when those nuances start to really matter. But staying present in this way also requires us to kind of drop our attachment to outcome when we go into new situations. So often we're going to be going into an interaction with some form of hope about how it goes. But when we have those scripts running in the back of our mind that are based around hoping someone likes us or hoping they give us some specific type of feedback or hoping the interaction goes in some specific direction, what we're not doing is, once again, staying present. What we're doing is trying to drive the conversation towards a particular outcome. So to really get good at practicing this skill, it's also important to make sure that in all of our interactions with people, as much as humanly possible, we are dropping our attachment to outcome. We are letting go of the things that we wish they would say or do, or the script we invented for them inside of our own minds that we want them to say. And we're actually getting curious in an authentic way about what they are saying and how they are showing up and the information they are disclosing to us about themselves. Again, we're going to learn way more that way, way faster. And then there's those final hurdles of getting close to someone, and instead of defaulting to projection, so deciding that we know what they're thinking or feeling, and rigidity, so deciding that there is a specific way every relationship should be, and we know what that way is, how do we move that to a place where we're instead relying on differentiation and adaptation to keep the people we're close to close? This is going to require doing a lot of self-awareness work. So figuring out, where am I kind of blocked from understanding myself properly? And in what ways might I be projecting onto other people rather than owning and sitting with what my feelings are? Again, differentiation requires a deep understanding of what's me and what is someone else. We are all our own unique ecosystems, and we need to understand as clearly as possible, how does my ecosystem function, in order to be present enough with another person to notice differences in their ecosystem when they arise, without feeling threatened by those differences. So the more we increase our self-awareness and work on identifying our blind spots, which is often going to take the help of the people around us, the more we start to naturally sensitize ourselves to our social environments. And when I use the word sensitive here, I don't mean this in the sense of hypersensitivity. I'm not talking about making yourself into someone who is overly defensive. What I'm talking about is sensitivity in the true sense of the word. So literally being in our senses, tuned into exactly what is happening in reality in a given moment. And being able to notice in that moment, how am I feeling? How is this experience of reality impacting me on a physiological level? And also, what's happening for this person in front of me in reality in this moment? What changes am I noticing in their energy or the way that they're approaching our conversation as it goes on? This is the art of attunement. Just like to dance well with a partner, you have to be present in your body and noticing and attuned to the slight changes that they're making in theirs. The same is true when it comes to developing intimacy with somebody. The more we can stay present, sensitive to our environments, and engaged with the other person, the better we're going to get at making intuitive adaptations that allow our relationships to function more smoothly. Usually, the really big fights that we see between couples who are insecurely attached come about because both of them are regulating much more with the ideas they have of each other and of how a relationship should be inside of their own minds than they are with each other in reality. When we are truly attuned to another person, when we have learned to stay present with them and really notice what it's like to be with them and how we interact with one another, it's pretty hard for huge chasms of understanding to develop between two people because you're going to catch them much, much sooner when you're consistently in the present moment with somebody. And the thing is, this takes a ton of practice precisely because when we are young, being present is often a very threatening thing to us if we are insecurely attached. The reason it's threatening is because our bodies are going to be screaming, hey, work harder on your strategy for figuring out how to get your needs met so that you don't get abandoned. This being in the present moment thing is not that important and doesn't have much to offer us. And a big part of this process is going to be sitting down and spending time with that self-protective part of us and letting it know, hey, I have a different way now of getting those same needs met. I'm not leaving you out in a lurch here. And so, like any significant change, this is going to happen slowly in a series of different moments where we practice over and over again these new skills. But like most things we do when we are earning secure attachment, this only makes our lives better and richer and more fulfilling the more we practice it. So there's a lot of gold to be mined along the way. All right, that's all I have to say for today on developing the skill of attunement inside of intimate relationships. As always, let me know any questions, comments, thoughts you have as you go through this video. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.